On a snowy Christmas Eve, a tired father, carrying his young daughter, is humiliated outside a lavish military gala, accused of trying to sneak in for free food, mocked, filmed, and threatened, till a faded patch on his worn jacket reveals a truth so powerful that it stops an entire crowd in its tracks. This man, a civilian helicopter pilot, once defied impossible odds to save 12 Navy SEALs in a war zone, refused every medal and honor, and raised his daughter alone while the world forgot him. Tonight, for the first time, his sacrifices finally seen, and the people who judged him must confront the cost of underestimating the quiet heroes among us. On Christmas Eve, outside a packed military charity gala, a worn-down father holding his young daughter was stopped at the entrance and accused of trying to sneak in for free food, security laughing under their breath while guests lifted phones to record threatening police as the child clung to him in silence, until a Navy Admiral passing by noticed something hidden inside the man's battered jacket and froze because that faded patch exposed a truth powerful enough to bring an entire crowd to its knees. But before that moment unfolded, this is what really happened. The weathered pickup rolled into the overflow lot, coughing and sputtering, its cracked taillight spilling broken red across snow-dusted pavement, while the harborside grand estate glowed ahead like a postcard, chandeliers blazing. Behind tall windows where gowns and dress uniforms drifted in elegant patterns, Christmas Eve turning the coastal New England mansion into a dream with luminaries, lining the cobblestone drive and a string quartet floating through the cold air as Callum Drexler sat behind the wheel, engine ticking as it cooled, staring at the gold light, a lean man in his mid-30s with gray in his stubble, permanent shadows under his eyes, hands rough and scarred from years of work, wearing a faded olive-green Carhartt jacket frayed at the cuffs with a small hole near the collar he never got around to fixing, while in the back seat 6-year-old Bryn slept against her stuffed bear, curls pressed to the glass, breath fogging. It softly, her oversized pink coat already too small, her shoes clean but worn. Discount store shoes stretched to the limit. And Cal's face softened as he watched her in the rearview mirror, pulling a crumpled invitation from the glove box. Heavy cardstock folded too many times, addressed to him by name from the New England Veterans Coalition with the words Civilian Contractor Liaison printed beneath, words he had stared at for 3 days before deciding to come. And on the passenger seat, a sealed envelope bent at the corners marked in careful handwriting. In honor of those who didn't come home? Holding $47 in singles and fives and a handwritten note? Not much. Never enough. As he exhaled and told himself 10 minutes was all he needed, drop the envelope, pay respects, leave. Before Bryn woke fully and asked questions he couldn't answer, gently shaking her shoulder until she blinked awake and asked if Mommy was there, tightening his throat as he lifted her into his arms and stepped into the December cold, her arms wrapping his neck in quiet trust. The walk from the backlot stretching longer than it was as his boots crunched over gravel to cobblestone red. Carpet ahead, valets guiding luxury cars, Cal hugging the edge, trying to stay invisible, but a broad-shouldered security guard in a black suit stepped into his path. Hand raised, voice flat, turning sharp as his eyes swept the worn jacket. Salt-stained boots, sleeping child, the walk from the backlot, stopping him cold with private event. Cal calmly answering, he was invited. Just dropping a donation, his name on the list, Callum Drexler. The guard Todd scrolling a tablet slowly, frowning, radioing in a possible crasher. That word hanging heavy in the cold as Bryn tightened against Cal, sensing danger, guests drifting closer with champagne flutes. A woman in pearls filming, with amused curiosity. Another man lecturing about security, young officer eager to assist, and Cal staring straight ahead, jaw set, refusing to react. Holding his daughter as she went completely still against his shoulder, unaware that hidden beneath that frayed jacket was a truth powerful enough to shatter every assumption standing in front of him. Asterisk. He could feel her shaking against him as the guard's voice tightened and told him to step back from the entrance. Cal answered evenly that he wasn't here to cause trouble, even though something heavy was starting to clamp down inside. His chest, that old familiar feeling of being evaluated and dismissed before he ever had a chance to speak, explaining again that he only wanted to leave an envelope inside for the memorial. When Felicity's voice sliced through with performative concern, saying he claimed he was donating and probably thought there was free food inside. Pulling polite, cutting laughter from the small crowd, is the kind that lands softly but still hurts. A woman in a fur coat leaning in to whisper to her companion, both of them smiling, while Cal felt Bryn's arms tighten harder around his neck. Her small body tense, and he wished he could cover her ears to block this moment from settling into her memory. But his hands were full, carrying her weight, and she was watching now. Her dark eyes wide and unblinking, studying the faces around her with the kind of intense focus that would later keep her awake at night. Someone asking if they should call. The police, Todd nodding slowly as his hand drifted back toward his radio and warning that if Cal didn't leave now, he would. And for a brief second, Cal thought about walking away because it would be easier. It always had been, but then he thought about the envelope in his pocket, about the name written inside it, about the promise he'd made to himself 7 years earlier that he would never forget. And he thought about Bryn, about what she was, learning right now about how the world treated people like them. So he turned back toward Felicity and the crowd of polished strangers, recording him with their phones and their eyes, and said he flew helicopters for the military 7 years ago and had been invited to honor someone who died. That was all he wanted to do, only for Felicity to smile with pity, the kind reserved for obvious lies, telling him sure he did, more laughter following, lighter now and more dismissive. The silver-haired man adjusting his cufflinks and muttering that everyone claims they served these days. And something inside Cal went completely flat, his face empty, look of someone who has stopped expecting to be believed as he turned away from all of them. Shoulders tight with controlled emotion, telling Bryn it was time to go, and as he walked back toward the parking lot, a sudden gust of wind flipped his jacket collar open for just a second, revealing inside the lining a faded tactical patch. Barely visible in the soft glow of the luminaries, crudely stitched by hand long ago with whatever thread had been available. The colors almost washed out completely, dark green and gray blending together. Though the letters were still there if you knew how to look, silent in on the first line, the rest hidden by a fold of fabric below it, 2 for D. Unnoticed by the crowd already drifting back toward champagne and comfort, except for one man, Rear Admiral James Harding, who had stepped out a side entrance for air to escape the crowded ballroom and endless small talk. A man in his late 50s with gray at his temples and a chest full of ribbons and medals earned over 30 years of service. A cigar lit against his doctor's advice as he enjoyed the sharp bite of December air, until the disturbance at the entrance pulled his attention, and he glanced over out of habit and saw a man in a worn jacket walking away with a child in his arms. Something about the posture catching his eye, the controlled movement, protective way he carried the girl while still moving with purpose. And then the wind shifted the jacket and Harding saw the patch, his cigar slipping from his fingers, and hissing into the snow as recognition hit him all at once, whispering no under his breath as he stepped forward and froze, his hand lifting without realizing it as his eyes locked onto those faded letters no one else would recognize. Letters that shouldn't exist because that operation had never officially happened. Silent Night, December 24th, Grid X-ray. His heart pounding as his hands began to shake while he watched the man reach a rusted pickup in the overflow lot. Gently place the child inside, kneel by the open door, while the girl reached up to touch his face. And before Harding fully decided, his feet were already moving. Polished dress shoes crunching on gravel as memories he'd buried for years came rushing back, images that still woke him up soaked in cold sweat. And the name returned to him like a prayer and a curse at the same time. Callum Drexler, the civilian pilot who officially never existed, the man who flew into hell on Christmas Eve when every military pilot refused, the ghost who saved 12 men and vanished, and Harding reached the parking lot just as the truck door closed, calling Callum Drexler's name with a voice rough with emotion. As the man turned instantly, body tightening, instinctively defensive and protective.
"Do I know you?" the man asked cautiously, and Harding stepped fully into the lamppost's light, his dress uniform catching the glow, his face drained of color and filled with something that looked dangerously close to hope, saying quietly that the man didn't remember him, but he remembered the man. And Cal's expression tightened instantly, walls sliding back into place as he told him he was leaving and didn't need an escort. Until Harding's voice cracked just slightly as he asked about the jacket and whether he could see it. The pause stretching long and heavy, while inside the truck the little girl pressed her face to the window, eyes wide and scared, watching everything unfold. And Cal finally looked at Harding, really looked, something flickering across his face, recognition maybe, or just bone-deep exhaustion, before he nodded once, and Harding stepped closer, hands trembling as he gently pulled back the collar of the worn Carhartt jacket, the faded tactical patch now fully exposed beneath the parking lot lights, nearly washed out by time, but still unmistakable to someone who knew what it meant. Silent Night, 24, deck grid X-ray. And Harding sucked in a breath as tears filled his eyes without apology, whispering Jesus Christ as the reality hit him that it really was him, while Cal closed his jacket again and stepped back instinctively, creating distance the way someone does who has learned not to trust sudden recognition, telling Harding he didn't know what he thought he remembered and that it was a long time ago. But Harding didn't move, his eyes fixed on the patch and the memories it carried, as he said December 24th, 7 years ago, Syrian border. And Cal went completely still, jaw tightening, muscle memory kicking in as he locked everything down, until Harding continued in the clipped cadence of a mission brief, talking about the SEAL Team 6 extraction, 12 men trapped in a collapsing safe house, weather grounding every aircraft, command aborting the mission, snow spiraling across the lot as Bryn pressed her face harder against the glass, watching her father in the Admiral. And Harding said simply that Cal flew them out, the words hanging between them, Cal's hands curling into fists before relaxing as he answered quietly that he did what anyone would have done, only for Harding to shake his head fiercely and say no, because no one else did. And a flash of memory slammed into Cal without warning, rotor blades fighting wind and snow, static-filled radio calls repeating that all assets were grounded, enemy fire intensifying, the mission canceled, and his own voice steady despite knowing the risk as he said he was going in anyway. The memory fading as fast as it came, leaving him standing there 7 years later, facing a man whose life he had saved and whose gratitude he had spent years avoiding. Harding stepping closer and saying every pilot called it suicide, and Cal answering before he could stop himself that he would do it again, the words raw and unfiltered. Harding replying softly that he knew he would, and that he'd spent 7 years trying to find him, before footsteps crunched on gravel and Todd approached with several gala guests, drawn by the tension. Felicity still filming from a safer distance now. Senator Lionel Harwick inserting himself with practiced confidence. Ensign Denting following in crisp dress whites, asking what was going on. Felicity's tone shifting to cautious concern as she asked if everything was all right. And Harding turned to face them, his expression hardening into something colder, sharper, the face of a commander who had just witnessed an unforgivable act, stating clearly that this man had been turned away, mocked, filmed, and threatened with police. The senator beginning to mention protocols and security procedures before Harding cut him off with surgical precision, demanding if he knew who the man was. Silence spreading as Todd shifted uneasily, sensing the ground had shifted beneath him, and Harding's voice carried across the parking lot as he asked if any of them had any idea who they had just humiliated. Inside the truck, Bryn's tiny hand pressed against the frosted window, leaving a soft imprint as if marking a moment she couldn't yet understand, while Todd's voice, uncertain and defensive, tried to assert order, reminding everyone that Cal was just a contractor, which he was. But Harding stepped closer to the gathering now, military posture rigid, voice lowering into the crisp, measured cadence of a mission brief, declaring that Cal was a civilian helicopter pilot contracted through a DoD black site liaison program that most had no clearance to even know existed. And Felicity slowly lowered her phone, her pale face betraying shock as Harding rattled off details of December 24th, Syrian border, SEAL Team 6, the words quickening with the force of years of suppressed gratitude and anger converging into something raw and undeniable. 12 men left behind in a collapsing compound, all military aircraft grounded by weather, enemy fire, and command aborts, and the distant string quartet from the mansion seemed to dissolve into silence, leaving only the weight of the story. of a man flying an unarmed MD-500 into a Category 3 storm through active enemy airspace, zero support, zero backup, zero chance if anything went wrong. And Harding's voice cracked slightly, letting 7 years of nightmares bleed through his professional control, while Cal turned away, shoulders tense, face carefully blank, trying to hide the rush of emotions he had spent years burying, the world finally seeing the impossible truth he had lived with alone. And Harding dropped his voice to something quieter, personal, saying he was one of the men Cal had saved. Ensign Denting pressing a hand to his chest, Felicity silent, stunned, Senator Harwick removing his hat, certainty replaced by confusion, and then the question hanging in the cold air. Why wasn't Cal decorated, wealthy, honored, wearing a uniform festooned with medals instead of a tattered jacket and salt-stained boots? And Harding answered softly, almost with grief, that Cal had refused everything, every medal, every honor, every benefit, disappearing from the system entirely. And Harding's voice faltered again, asking why, and Harding revealed the final blow. His wife died 3 months after that mission. Cancer, stage 4, and he had a daughter to raise. Every eye in the crowd shifting to Bryn, pressed against the window, watching her father finally recognized in ways she couldn't yet grasp. And Harding's voice softened further, asking if he had cashed the $250,000 sent by the Navy, hazard pay, danger compensation, survivor benefits. And Cal's quiet reply, almost a whisper, was, "No, I didn't do it for money," followed by the inevitable question, "Then why?" And Cal finally turned, face raw with emotion he usually locked away, saying it was because someone had needed to answer when the call came. And Felicity stepped forward, hands shaking, mascara running, admitting she had filmed him, had laughed, hadn't known, while Cal gently interrupted, without accusation, and Felicity, fumbling, deleted the video in front of everyone, a gesture both necessary and painfully inadequate. Todd removed his cap, staring at the ground as if seeing through it, apologizing for not listening, for not checking carefully. And Cal nodded once, small acceptance but no anger, just exhaustion, the weariness of a man who had been fighting battles no one saw for 7 long years. And then Ensign Denting stepped forward, young face raw with emotion, voice cracking as he said that what Cal had done was why he enlisted, why stories like his inspired service. The weight of the moment settling on everyone present, the next generation standing before a man whose courage was unrecognized officially, but whose sacrifice had shaped them. And Cal finally pulled out the crumpled envelope he had carried from the truck, the reason he had braved humiliation and cold and doubt, holding it steady as he extended it to Harding, saying softly, "It's not much, but I wanted to honor someone." And Harding took it with care, like it was fragile, precious. And the silence that followed carried the gravity of what had finally been acknowledged, the moment folding years of secrecy, courage, and quiet heroism into a single breath shared between father, daughter, and those witnessing the weight of history in human form. He opened it slowly, fingers trembling slightly on the worn, folded paper, revealing $47 in cash, mostly singles and fives, a few tens, the kind of money patched together from tips, leftover coins, and whatever extra he could scrounge after rent, groceries, and trying to keep a 6-year-old clothed in shoes that fit. And tucked beneath the cash, a note on torn spiral notebook paper, crumpled but legible. Harding's voice cracked as he read it aloud. "In memory of Chief Petty Officer Marcus Lyle, KIA 22nd of December. He called me brother. I never got to say goodbye." And the weight of those words struck the Admiral physically, hands shaking, paper trembling as he spoke. Marcus had been in that bird that night. Cal pulled him out with a shattered femur and collapsed lung, and he lived 6 more years with his family, 6 more Christmases, 6 more years his daughters got to see their father. And Cal's face crumbled, shoulders trembling, hand coming up to cover his mouth, silent sobs shaking him as he tried desperately to keep it together. He opened it slowly, fingers trembling slightly on the worn, folded paper, revealing $47 in cash, mostly singles and fives, a few tens, the kind of money patched together from tips, leftover coins, and whatever extra he could scrounge after rent, groceries, and trying to keep a 6-year-old clothed in shoes that fit. And tucked beneath the cash, a note on torn spiral notebook paper, crumpled but legible. Harding's voice cracked as he read it aloud. In memory of Chief Petty Officer Marcus Lyle, KIA 22nd of December, he called me brother. I never got to say goodbye. And the weight of those words struck the Admiral physically, hands shaking, paper trembling as he spoke. Marcus had been in that bird that night. Cal pulled him out with a shattered femur and collapsed lung, and he lived 6 more years with his family, 6 more Christmases, 6 more years his daughters got to see their father. And Cal's face crumbled, shoulders trembling, hand coming up to cover his mouth, silent sobs shaking him as he tried desperately to keep it together. And then the truck door opened and Bryn clambered out, oversized pink coat dragging in the snow as she ran to him, arms wrapping around his leg, pressing her face against his worn jeans. And Cal's hand came down over her dark curls, steadying himself in the warmth of her presence. And then Harding's voice cut through, firm now, commanding, "Honor him inside, Commander, steady as our guest." And Cal shook his head, voice barely audible. "I don't belong in there." And Harding stepped closer, hand on his shoulder. "Callum Drexler, will you come inside?" And Cal glanced down at Bryn, small face lifted, eyes red but glimmering with hope. Then at the crowd who had mocked him, now staring with awe, shame, and the desperate need for forgiveness. And finally he whispered, "Okay." And the walk back to the entrance was silent except for snow crunching under boots, Harding leading, Cal following, Bryn clinging tightly to his neck, and behind them the crowd trailing, a procession of witnesses to their own judgment and reversal, red carpet underfoot, ensign denting snapping to attention, salute crisp and precise. "Sir, it would be my honor to escort you." And Cal, overwhelmed, nodded, and together they walked toward the warm golden light spilling from the mansion. Inside the gala, oblivious to what was about to unfold, officers in dress blues, veterans in suits, donors in gowns. The string quartet playing classical pieces with soft elegance, champagne flowing, conversations buzzing in comfortable rhythm, until the music abruptly stopped and Harding raised his voice, trained by decades in command, commanding the room. "Everyone, your attention, please." And silence fell. Strings lifted mid-bow, champagne paused halfway to lips, hundreds of faces turning to the entrance, where Cal stood holding Bryn, worn jacket stark against glittering surroundings. And Harding recounted, 7 years ago on Christmas Eve, 12 Navy SEALs were left behind enemy lines. Command called abort. Weather and enemy fire grounded all aircraft. Every military pilot refused to fly. And now here he was, the one who went in when no one else would, gesturing to Cal as the crowd's eyes followed, the weight of courage, sacrifice, and long-hidden heroism settling over every witness in that golden ballroom. And for the first time, the man who had risked everything was seen, understood, and honored in the simplest, most human way possible, not by medals, not by recognition, but by the acknowledgement of the lives he saved and the quiet dignity he carried for years unseen.
This man didn't refuse. Callum Drexler flew an unarmed civilian helicopter straight into hell and brought every single one of us home, all 12 men. And murmurs rippled through the ballroom like a sudden gust of wind, officers leaning toward one another, whispering in disbelief, veterans straightening in their seats, donors watching with widening eyes, comprehension dawning as the enormity of the act sank in. And yet he refused every honor, rejected every medal, every benefit, and when his wife passed months later, he raised his daughter alone, juggling 3 jobs, living quietly, never asking for recognition. And Harding's voice cracked on the last word. Tonight he came here to honor a fallen brother, and we turned him away. And the shame in the room was thick enough to touch, palpable, almost physical. While Cal kept his gaze down, Bryn pressed into his chest, absorbing every look like it weighed her small frame. And Harding stepped back, standing at attention, hand rising slowly in formal salute. "Callum Drexler, on behalf of the 12 men you saved and their families, "Thank you." For a heartbeat, and no one moved, silence stretching, and then Ensign Denting snapped to attention, hand to brow, followed by every uniformed service member present, dozens of hands lifting in perfect synchrony, the quiet absolute, broken only by snow drifting against the windows. And Bryn looked up at her father, confused. "Daddy, why are they doing that?" he whispered, voice thick with tears. "Because they're saying thank you," Harding replied, walking to the memorial altar where photos of fallen service members surrounded a single unlit candle, every year lit in their honor. And tonight he asked for someone who understood sacrifice to light it, kneeling in front of Bryn. "Would you like to light the candle, sweetheart?" Bryn hesitated, then nodded, Cal kneeling beside her, whispering, "For Marcus and for Mommy." She stepped forward on unsteady legs, taking the long match in her small hand, shaking as she struck it, the flame catching bright and warm, touching the wick, the candle glowing steady. Cal behind her, hands on her shoulders, the faded patch on his jacket now visible to all. Harding standing with hand over heart, the crowd bowing silently, reverently, and Bryn whispering so softly only her father could hear, "Mommy would be proud of you, Daddy." And Cal closing his eyes, tears streaming down his face, while the evening continued, veterans approaching one by one, an older man with a cane shaking his hand. "My son was on that team. You brought him home to us." A young Marine, voice trembling, "I joined because of stories like yours." And Felicity returning with an envelope thick with donations. "This is for Marcus and for anything Bryn needs." And hours later, as guests departed, Cal and Bryn preparing to leave, Harding walking them to the door. "You know we've been looking for you for 7 years. I didn't want to be found. I know, but you deserve more than this." Cal looking down at Bryn asleep in his arms. "I have everything I need. The check is still waiting. The benefits. I'll think about it." Harding smiling. "Merry Christmas, Callum. Merry Christmas, Admiral." Cal buckling Bryn into the back seat, she stirring half awake. "Daddy, was tonight good?" "Yeah, kiddo, it was good." The engine coughing to life, pulling away into the snowy night, Harding and the remaining guests watching, a young officer saluting as the rusted pickup disappeared, its cracked tail light fading like a memory that refuses to be forgotten. And Callum Drexler, never one for recognition, never asking for thanks, just showing up when it mattered most and disappearing when the cameras turned on. But on this Christmas Eve, in front of the people who judged him, his sacrifice was finally seen. Because sometimes the people we overlook are the very ones who saved us all. And if you've ever known someone who never sought recognition but deserved more than anyone else, share their story in the comments. And if this moved you, pass it on, because heroes like Callum deserve to be remembered.